I had been planning that dinner for 6 weeks, not because I needed a party, not because I needed anyone to make a fuss over me. I planned it because 32 felt like a year that deserved to be marked, and I was tired of letting my birthdays pass by like they did not matter. I set the table myself. I ordered the food myself. I even ironed a tablecloth for the first time in my adult life because I wanted everything to feel right. My parents sat at the head of that table with the same expressions they always wore, like they were doing me a favor just by showing up. And then, somewhere between the salad and the main course, my father put down his fork, looked across the table at me, and said something so casual, so completely without shame, that it took me a full 30 seconds to understand what I had just heard. He said they only kept me because of the tax benefits. My mother nodded, like it was a reasonable thing to say. Like it explained something that had always needed explaining. Like I was supposed to thank them for their honesty. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something real. If you were sitting at that table, if you had just spent 6 weeks preparing a birthday dinner, and the people who raised you chose that exact moment to reduce your entire childhood to a financial decision, what would you have done? Would you have cried? Would you have walked out? Would you have sat there quietly like I did, with your hands folded in your lap, trying to decide if what you just heard was actually real? Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. And I think by the end of this story, you are going to understand exactly why I stopped trying to earn love that was never actually offered. My name is Lousia, and I am going to tell you about the night my parents accidentally set me free. I need you to understand something about who I was before that dinner. I was not a dramatic person. I was not someone who looked for reasons to feel hurt or misunderstood. If anything, I was the opposite. I was the kind of person who spent most of her life finding reasons to excuse the people who should have loved her better. I was 32 years old, and I had been making excuses for my parents since I was old enough to notice that something between us felt different from what other kids described about their families. I told myself it was their work schedules. Then I told myself it was their personalities. Then I told myself that some parents just showed love differently, and that did not mean the love was not there. I kept moving the explanation around like furniture in a small room, trying to find an arrangement that made the space feel comfortable. Nothing ever quite worked, but I kept trying. I grew up in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. My parents, Gerald and Nora, were practical people. That was the word everyone used for them, practical. Gerald worked for a logistics company for most of his career, moving up slowly into a mid-level management position that he held for almost 20 years. Nora worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a local dental practice. They were not wealthy, but they were stable. The house was paid off by the time I was in high school. The cars were never new, but they were reliable. The bills got paid. The lights stayed on. From the outside, we looked like a family that had figured things out. But there is a particular kind of loneliness that lives inside a house where everything works and nothing is warm. I did not have a word for it when I was small. I just knew that when I came home with a good grade, my mother would glance at it and say something like, "Good, keep it up," and then go back to whatever she was doing. I knew that when I had a bad day at school, my father would say something practical like, "Well, what did you expect?" and then tell me to go wash my hands for dinner. I knew that birthday celebrations in our house were efficient. There would be a cake, usually store-bought. There would be a card, usually signed with both names and nothing personal written inside. There would be a present, usually something I needed rather than something I wanted. And then it would be over, and we would watch television, and the next day everything would go back to normal. I want to be fair to them. I'm not telling you this to make them into monsters. They fed me. They clothed me. I had a roof and a school and a doctor when I was sick. I am aware that many people grow up with less than that, and I have never taken those basics for granted. But I also grew up knowing, in the quiet place where children store their truest feelings, that I was more of a responsibility to my parents than I was a joy. I was something they managed, not something they celebrated. I left for college at 18 and felt something shift the moment I drove away. I remember looking in the rearview mirror at the house getting smaller, and instead of feeling homesick, I felt something closer to relief. That feeling made me feel guilty for years. I told myself it meant I was ungrateful. I told myself that good daughters did not feel relieved to leave. So I called home every Sunday, even when the calls were short and awkward. I came back for every holiday, even when the holidays were quiet and strange. I kept showing up, kept trying to close the distance, kept believing that one day something would click and my family would suddenly feel like what I had always hoped it could be. After college, I built a life I was genuinely proud of. I went into healthcare administration, started in an entry-level billing position, and worked my way up steadily over 8 years to become a department coordinator at a regional hospital network. The work was demanding, and I was good at it. I had a small apartment that I had made into a real home, with plants on the windowsill and books on every shelf and a kitchen where I actually cooked real meals. I had friends I trusted. I had a therapist I saw every other week, a woman named Dr. Calves who had helped me start naming some of the things I had been carrying since childhood. I was not perfect, and my life was not perfect, but I had built something real with my own hands, and that mattered to me. Through all of it, I kept maintaining my relationship with Gerald and Nora. I visited 4 times a year. I called regularly. When my father had a minor health scare 2 years before the dinner, I took time off work and drove 6 hours to be with them, staying for a week, managing his follow-up appointments, organizing his medications, making sure my mother was not too overwhelmed. When they needed their gutters cleaned, I hired someone. When their water heater broke, I helped cover the replacement. Not because they asked, exactly. More because it felt like the right thing to do, and because part of me still believed that if I kept being useful enough, reliable enough, present enough, they would eventually look at me the way I had always needed them to look at me. Dr. Calves had a term for this. She called it earned love-seeking, the idea that if you just do enough, give enough, prove enough, eventually you will unlock the affection that should have been freely given from the beginning. She was gentle about naming it, but she was clear. She told me that people who had not received unconditional love as children often spent enormous amounts of adult energy trying to retroactively earn it. She told me it rarely worked. I heard her. I understood the logic. And then I went home for Christmas and spent 2 days making my mother's favorite casserole and organizing my father's filing cabinet because I could not help myself. That was who I was going into my 32nd birthday. A woman who understood her patterns and had not yet found the strength to fully break them. A woman who still hoped, despite everything, that the people who raised her would one day actually see her. Birthday dinner was my idea. I had never thrown myself a birthday dinner before. Usually I would wait to see if anyone planned something, and when no one did, I would let the day go by quietly and tell myself it did not matter. But something was different about turning 32. I could not fully explain it even to myself at the time. It felt like a line I was drawing, not loudly, not dramatically, just privately. I was going to celebrate my own life. I was going to mark the day. I was going to sit at a table with good food, and the people who were supposed to love me and simply be present in my own story for once. I chose a Saturday evening in late March. I made reservations at a restaurant I loved, a mid-range Italian place called Carusso's that had deep booths and warm lighting and pasta that tasted the way pasta was supposed to taste. I invited my parents, my younger brother Derek and his wife Pamela, and 2 of my close friends, a woman named Simone who I had known since college, and a man named Theo who I worked with and trusted completely. 7 people total, including me. I sent the invitation 3 weeks in advance. I followed up a week later to confirm. I arranged a small private dining room in the back of the restaurant because I wanted it to feel special. I paid a deposit. I chose the menu options in advance so the evening would flow smoothly. I even bought a new dress, a deep green wrap dress that made me feel like a version of myself I liked. I was not doing this to impress anyone. I was doing this for me. But I also, in the part of my heart I was still learning to be honest about, hoped that the effort would make my parents feel something. That they would look at the table I had arranged, the room I had reserved, the dress I had chosen, and feel proud of who their daughter had become. They arrived 7 minutes late. Gerald and Nora. They did not apologize for being late. My father shook hands with Theo and nodded at Simone. My mother kissed my cheek with the same efficiency she always brought to gestures of affection. They sat down and looked at the menu, and my father immediately said that Italian food always sat too heavy for him, but he supposed it was fine. I smiled and said I was glad they could make it. Simone squeezed my hand under the table. For the first hour, things were fine. Not warm, but fine. Derek and Pamela were in good spirits. Pamela was 3 months pregnant with their first child and still visibly excited about it, which gave everyone easy conversation material. Simone kept the mood light. She was naturally gifted at making conversation flow. Theo was steady and kind. The food was excellent. I had a glass of wine and let myself relax into the evening. And then, somewhere around the time the main courses arrived, something shifted. My father had been quieter than usual for about 20 minutes, which I had noticed but not worried about. He sometimes went quiet in social settings, retreating into himself without explanation. But then he cleared his throat and looked directly at me, and there was something in his expression I did not recognize immediately. It was not anger. It was not warmth. It was something closer to the look a person makes when they have decided to say something they have been holding back and have finally concluded that now is the right time. He said, "Lousia, your mother and I have been talking, and we think it is time we were honest with you about something." I put down my fork. The table went slightly quieter. Simone looked at me. My father said that, when I was born, he and my mother had not planned on having another child. He said that Derek had been their intended family, and that I came along at a time when they were already financially stretched. He said that a colleague at work had explained how dependent child tax credits worked, and that they had done the math and determined that having a second child would actually improve their financial position more than it would cost them in the short term. He said they made a deliberate decision based on that calculation. He said they only kept me because it made financial sense. I remember the exact quality of silence that followed. It was not a dramatic silence. It was not a movie silence with swelling music. It was just the quiet of a private dining room in an Italian restaurant on a Saturday night in March, with pasta going cold on the plates and 6 people trying to understand what they had just heard. My mother nodded when my father finished speaking, the way she nodded when she agreed with something he said about the weather or a news story. Like this was just information. Like this was a completely reasonable thing to say out loud at your daughter's birthday dinner. My father added that he thought I deserved to know the truth now that I was an adult, and that he hoped I understood it was nothing personal. Nothing personal. I want you to sit with that phrase for a moment. My entire existence, my birth, the decision to bring me into the world, had been a financial calculation, and my father wanted me to understand that it was nothing personal, like he was explaining why he had chosen one brand of insurance over another, like I was a policy decision, like I was a line item. I looked at Derek. Derek had gone very still. His fork was in his hand, but he was not eating. His face was pale. Pamela had her hand over her mouth. Simone was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, a combination of horror and protectiveness that made me feel, in that terrible moment, more seen than I had felt in years. Theo was looking at the table. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that. I did not cry right away, and part of me has wondered about that ever since. I think the truth is that some wounds are so precise that they do not bleed immediately. They just open quietly, and you stand there looking at them, not quite believing the shape of the damage. I picked up my wine glass. I took a sip. I set it back down, and I said very calmly that I appreciated them telling me. My father looked slightly relieved, like he had expected worse. My mother looked at her pasta. Simone excused herself to go to the restroom and squeezed my shoulder as she passed. Thea started a gentle conversation with Derek about something completely unrelated, something about a sports team, a kindness that I recognized and was grateful for. The dinner continued. We ordered dessert. The staff brought out a small cake with a candle, and everyone sang happy birthday in the muted way people do when something heavy is sitting in the room with them. I blew out the candle. My parents said goodnight at 8:45. My father patted my arm as he left. My mother said the pasta had been a bit rich. And then they were gone. Simone came back to the table and sat next to me and did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Lousia, are you okay?" I looked at the candle on the birthday cake, at the small curl of smoke still rising from the wick. "Indeed," I said, I honestly was not sure yet. We stayed another hour, Simone and Theo and Derek and Pamela. Derek was shaken in a way I had not expected. He kept apologizing, like he was somehow responsible for what our parents had said, like the knowledge of it had implicated him in something he did not ask to be part of. I told him it was not his fault. I meant it. Whatever our parents had decided before either of us was old enough to have opinions about it, Derek had not been a part of that decision. He was a child, too. We were both just outcomes of a calculation. We had never been given a vote in. Pamela cried a little in the parking lot. She kept saying she could not imagine. She just could not imagine. I hugged her and said she did not have to imagine it right now, and that she should focus on her pregnancy and her joy and not let this evening get into that space. I meant that too. I drove home alone. I had a one-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes from the restaurant. I parked in my spot and sat in the car for a while without going inside. The neighborhood was quiet. A neighbor's porch light was on. Somewhere on the next street, a dog was barking in a slow, lazy rhythm, not alarmed, just announcing itself. I thought about all the Sundays I had called home. I thought about the 6-hour drive I had made when my father's heart scare happened. I thought about the gutters I had hired someone to clean, the water heater I had helped pay for, the Christmas casseroles, the birthday cards I always chose carefully because I wanted them to feel personal, the holidays I had driven through bad weather to attend, the years of showing up, the years of trying. I thought about all of it, and then I thought about my father's face when he said it was nothing personal, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt something that was not hurt or guilt or confusion. I felt clarity. Clarity is a strange thing. It does not always feel good when it arrives. Sometimes it feels like standing in a room where someone has finally turned on the lights, and what you see in that light is not what you hoped it would be. But clarity is honest, and there is something in honesty that is stronger than comfort. I went inside. I took off the green dress. I made a cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table and opened a notebook that I kept for no particular purpose, just for writing things down when I needed to. And I wrote at the top of a blank page, in my own handwriting, the date, the night, and one sentence. I wrote, "I am done chasing a door that was never built for me." I went asleep at midnight. I did not call my parents. I did not send a message. I just let the night be what it was. The next morning, I woke up and felt something unexpected. I felt lighter. Not happy, exactly. Not healed. But lighter in a way I had not felt in a long time. Like something I had been carrying without quite knowing I was carrying it had been set down in that restaurant while I was sitting very still with my wine glass in my hand. I called Dr. Cavs that morning and left her a message explaining that I needed to move up my next appointment if possible. She called back within the hour and found me a slot for Tuesday. When I saw her, I told her everything, start to finish, the dinner, the announcement, the cake, the parking lot, the notebook. She listened without interrupting, which she was very good at. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Lousia, how are you sitting with this right now?" I told her I was sitting with it like someone who had just been handed a map they had been asking for years, and who was still deciding where to go with it. She said that was a healthy way to frame it. She said that what my parents had done, whether they understood it or not, had given me something. Not the gift they intended, not honesty or closure exactly, but a release from ambiguity. She said that one of the most painful things people in complicated family situations carry is the hope that maybe they were wrong about what they sensed, that maybe the relationship could still become what they needed it to be. She said my parents had removed that uncertainty. There was no more maybe. She asked me what I wanted to do with that clarity. I said I was not sure yet. I said I needed a few weeks to just sit with it before I made any decisions. She said that was wise. What I did not tell Dr. Cavs that Tuesday, because I had not yet made the decision consciously, was that something had already started shifting inside me that was less about feelings and more about facts. I had started, quietly, almost instinctively, to think about the practical shape of my relationship with my parents, not just the emotional shape. I had started to think about the things I did for them, the money I had spent, the time I had given, the access they had to my life, my resources, my reliability. I had started to think about what that relationship actually cost me, and what, it gave me in return. I did not arrive at any conclusions right away. I just started paying attention in a new way. About 2 weeks after the birthday dinner, my mother called. She called on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner, which was unusual because she almost never called on weekday evenings. I answered because I always answered. She said she was calling because she and Gerald thought I might have taken what he said the wrong way at the dinner. She said he had only meant to be transparent, and that they hoped I understood that they had done their best by me. She said, and I want you to hear exactly how she said this. She said, "We always made sure you had everything you needed, Lousia, and we think that counts for something." I stood at my stove with a wooden spoon in my hand, and I listened to my mother explaining to me why I should not be upset about having been told I was a financial decision. I listened to her tell me that having a roof over my head and food on the table was evidence of their love for me, or at least of something she was willing to call love. I listened to her list the things they had provided, spoken in the same flat voice she used to read grocery lists. I said, "Mom, I hear you," and I said good night and I hung up. I stood at the stove for another minute, and then I turned off the heat under the pan, and I went and sat on my couch, and I thought about what she had just said. We always made sure you had everything you needed. The logic of it was breathtaking in a particular way. The logic said that survival was the measure. The logic said that because they had not let me go without food or shelter, they had fulfilled the entire emotional contract of parenthood. The logic left no room for warmth, or presence, or joy, or the specific experience of being a child who knows she is wanted. I did not call back. I did not send a message. I just let the call be what it had been. That weekend, I sat down with my notebook and started writing things out, not in anger but in clarity. I made a list, not for anyone else, just for myself, of every financial thing I had done for my parents in the past 5 years. The gutter cleaning, the water heater, a car repair 2 years ago that I had covered quietly without them ever really acknowledging it, gifts that had always gone one direction, travel costs I had absorbed for holiday visits, the work week I had taken off, using my own paid time off, to drive 6 hours and manage my father's health scare. I added up rough numbers. The total was more than I expected. I put the notebook down and looked at that number for a while. I was not planning revenge. I want to be clear about that. I was not sitting there plotting something. I was just doing what I had always been slow to do, which was looking at my own life clearly and honestly and letting what I saw actually mean something. 2 months after the birthday dinner, something happened that changed the practical shape of everything. My mother called on a Saturday morning, and this time her voice had a different quality. Not the flat grocery list voice. Something with more texture in it, something that landed somewhere between urgency and performance. She said that she and Gerald had been thinking about their finances and their house, and that they had decided they wanted to do some updates to the property. She said the kitchen was dated, and the master bathroom needed a full renovation, and the back fence was rotting through in 3 sections. She said the estimates had come back higher than they expected. She said they were hoping I might be willing to help. She did not say how much. She said she wanted to talk through numbers when I had a chance to come visit. She made it sound like a conversation, like a family planning session, like of course Lousia would want to be part of helping to take care of things. I said I would think about it. I said I would let her know. After I hung up, I sat with what I was feeling, which was something complicated. There was the familiar pull, the old reflex that said, "This is your family, they need something, you should help." There was the voice that sounded like my mother saying, "We always made sure you had everything you needed." There was the memory of my father at the birthday dinner table, putting down his fork, clearing his throat, and explaining my birth like a business decision. There was the total in my notebook. There was the call, where my mother explained that I might have taken the wrong message. And underneath all of that, there was something quieter and stronger than any of it. There was the sentence I had written at the top of that notebook page on the night of my birthday. "I am done chasing a door that was never built for me." I did not call back that week. And then something happened that I had not anticipated that pushed everything into a completely different territory. My Aunt Rosalind called me, my mother's older sister, a woman I had always been fond of but not particularly close to, a retired school teacher who lived 2 hours south and who sent real handwritten cards at Christmas. She called me on a Wednesday and said she had heard about the birthday dinner. She said Derek had told her something about it, not everything, but enough. She said she was calling because she wanted to tell me something she had been sitting on for a long time. She said, "Lousia, I need you to know that when you were a baby, I offered to help your parents financially if they were struggling." She said she had offered more than once. She said the tax benefit story was something she had heard from my mother years ago, mentioned in passing as if it were a joke. She said she had always felt sick about it and had never known how to bring it up. She said she was sorry she had waited so long. I sat on my couch, and I listened to my Aunt Rosalind tell me that the people who raised me had talked openly, to at least one other family member, about the financial reasoning behind my birth, and that this other family member had offered them a path that did not require a second child, and they had still made the calculation they made, and then later found ways to let it slip into casual conversation. I thanked Rosalind. I told her I was glad she called. She asked if I was all right, and I said I was getting there. She said she loved me, and I said I knew, and I was grateful for that. After I hung up, I sat very still for a long time. Here is what I was processing. I had spent 32 years telling myself that my parents were simply practical people who showed love in a practical way. I had written elaborate internal explanations for why they were the way they were. I had given them the benefit of the doubt so many times that the doubt itself had almost disappeared. Now I had my father saying it plainly to a table full of people, my mother confirming it with a nod, and my aunt telling me it had been spoken about casually in family circles for years. It was not a slip. It was not an ambiguous comment that could be reinterpreted. It was the truth that had been the foundation of my relationship with my parents for my entire life. And they had simply decided, at a birthday dinner I organized and paid for myself, that 32 was old enough to hear it. Nothing personal. I went back to the notebook. I added the conversation with Rosalind. I wrote down what she had told me. I dated it. The following week, I called my mother. I told her that I had thought about her renovation request. I told her that I was not going to be contributing to the kitchen, the bathroom, or the fence. I told her this in a calm, clear voice. She asked why. I said that I had been doing a lot of thinking about my finances and my priorities, and that I had decided I needed to redirect my resources toward my own life and my own goals. She said that was a little cold, given everything they had done for me. I said I understood she saw it that way. I said I wished them well with the renovation, and I hoped they found a good solution. I said goodbye and I hung up. She called back 4 times in the next 2 hours. I did not answer. She left one voicemail. The voicemail said that she did not understand why I was punishing them, and that she and Gerald had always tried to do right by me, and that this was not the kind of daughter she had raised me to be. I listened to the voicemail twice. I saved it. I added it to the notes in my notebook, not the words exactly, but a record of when it arrived and the general tone of it. I was not building a case against my parents. I just needed to keep my own memory accurate because I knew myself. I knew how easily I slipped back into doubt, how quickly my own version of events could be softened by guilt and time. I did not call back. 3 days later, my father called. His voice had a quality I did not recognize right away, and then I placed it. He sounded apologetic. Not deeply apologetic, not the apology of someone who had genuinely reckoned with what they had done. It was more the apology of someone who had realized that the conversation had created a practical problem and wanted the practical problem resolved. He said that he might have expressed things poorly at the dinner. He said that what he had meant to convey was that they had always made responsible decisions as parents. He said he hoped I could understand what he was trying to say. I said I understood exactly what he had said. He paused. Then he said the renovation costs were going to be significant and that they had not budgeted properly for the fence replacement in particular. He said he was hoping we could find a way forward as a family. I told him I was not in a position to contribute to the renovation right now. I told him I said it with kindness, and I meant it with kindness. I told him I hoped the 3 of them could work something out and that I was thinking of them. He said, "Lousia, I am your father." I said, "I know you are." I said good night. I sat with that conversation for a long time after. I am your father. The weight of that sentence, the way it arrived like an argument in itself, like the biological fact was supposed to be sufficient justification, like the word father carried an obligation that ran only in one direction. I thought about it carefully. I thought about what fathers did, what parents did, what family was supposed to mean. I thought about it the way I thought about most things, methodically and honestly, because that was how my mind worked when I let it. And I arrived at the same place I had been arriving at since the birthday dinner, only more clearly now. The obligation in this family had always run one way, from me to them. The emotional labor had always been mine. The excusing, the adjusting, the showing up, the making do, the keeping the peace, the trying again, the hoping. Always me. What flowed back had been maintenance, roof and food and responsible management, which was something I acknowledged that, but it was not love. It was not the thing I had been trying to earn by cleaning their gutters and driving 6 hours and organizing my own birthday dinner and inviting them to the table. I had been paying a debt I never actually owed. By the end of that month, I had made several quiet decisions. None of them were dramatic. None of them were meant to punish anyone. They were simply the natural outcome of finally seeing the shape of a relationship clearly and deciding to live accordingly. The first decision was about money. I would not contribute to their renovation. I would not contribute to their household expenses going forward unless there was a genuine emergency involving health and safety. I would no longer absorb costs that were theirs to manage. My resources were mine, built by my own work, and they would go toward my own life. The second decision was about time. I would not be driving 6 hours for every holiday unless I genuinely wanted to go. I would not be using my paid time off to manage their household logistics. I would visit when it felt like a real relationship, not when it felt like a duty performance. The third decision was about information. I would be careful about what I shared with my parents going forward. Not secretive, but careful. Because I had come to understand that information in this family had a way of being used as leverage, and I was no longer going to hand over leverage freely. The fourth decision was about the story itself. I was done managing other people's perceptions of what had happened at that birthday dinner. I had not told anyone outside of Simone, Theo, Derek, and Pamela what my parents had said that night. I had been quiet about it the way I was always quiet, protecting people who had not protected me, managing an image that did not belong to me. I decided I was done with that particular duty. I did not post anything publicly. I did not make any announcements. But when Rosalind asked me if she could share what she knew with one other family member, an older cousin named Margaret who had always been close to my mother, and who Rosalind thought deserved to understand the dynamic better, I said yes. I said yes calmly and without guilt, because I had finally understood that the truth is not a weapon when you deliver it gently and let it land where it needs to land. Margaret called me a week later. She was quiet on the phone in a way I had not heard from her before. She said she had always wondered about certain things. She said she was sorry. She said she hoped I knew I mattered, and I said I was learning to know that better every day, which was the most honest thing I could have told her. Then Margaret did something I had not anticipated. Margaret, who was close to my mother, who had always been in my mother's corner at every family gathering, who had known my parents since long before I existed, sat my mother down at a family lunch that I was not invited to and that I had not arranged, and asked her directly whether the story Rosalind had told was true. My mother said yes. She said it the same way she had nodded at the birthday dinner, matter-of-factly. She said they had done what made sense at the time. Margaret, by her own account when she told me about it later, sat with that for a moment, and then she said something that my mother did not have an easy answer for. She said, "Nora, do you understand that Lousia has spent her entire life trying to earn something you decided before she was born that you were not going to give her?" My mother apparently had no answer for that. She looked at her lunch. Something shifted in the extended family after that. Not loudly, not dramatically, but visibly. Cousins who had always had a particular perception of my parents as responsible and practical people who had raised 2 children without complaint started to see a different outline when they looked at that picture. Rosalind became more openly warm toward me. Mark got started calling me with a frequency and a genuineness that was new. An uncle I had not spoken to in years reached out with a casual message that was kind in a way that felt intentional. None of this was a campaign against my parents. I want to be clear about that. I did not orchestrate anything. I did not rally anyone. I simply stopped hiding the truth, and the truth, once free, found its own path. My parents noticed the shift. I know they did because my mother called me 3 weeks after the Margate lunch and said she felt like something was happening in the family and she did not understand it. She said people were acting strangely around her. She said she hoped I had not been saying things. I said I had only told the truth when directly asked. She was quiet. I said I hoped she had a good evening and I ended the call. My father sent a text message the following Sunday, which was unusual for him because he almost never texted. The message said only, "Lousia, we are your parents. We hope you will remember that." I read it once and put my phone down and went back to the book I was reading. About 6 weeks after the Margate lunch, something else happened, something practical and significant that I had not foreseen. My parents had mentioned, over the years, that they intended to leave the house to both me and Derek equally when they were gone. They had said it in the vague way people say these things, not in any document, not in any formal arrangement, just in conversation, as a given. It was one of those family understandings that everyone operates around without anyone ever actually verifying. Derek called me on a Thursday evening and said he had gotten a call from our parents. He said they had told him they were planning to update their estate planning. He said they wanted to talk to both of us about it together. He said his tone was careful, like he was not sure how to frame what he was telling me. He asked if I knew anything about their plans. I said I did not. Derek was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Lousia, they told me they are thinking about structuring things differently going forward." He did not say more than that, but I understood what he was not saying. I told Derek that he should not feel caught in the middle of this. I told him that whatever our parents decided about their own assets was within their rights to decide. I told him I did not want him to feel like he had to choose sides or carry messages. He said he knew, but he wanted me to know what was happening. I said I appreciated that. After I hung up, I sat with the information. My parents were likely changing their estate plans in response to my withdrawal from the relationship, which was their right. They owned their property. They could do whatever they chose with it. I had not anticipated this exactly, but I also was not surprised by it. It fit the pattern. In this family, access and resources had always been connected to compliance. The message was not subtle. Fall back in line or lose your share of what we leave behind. I opened my notebook. I wrote down the date. I wrote down what Derek had told me. And then I wrote something else, something that surprised me slightly with its clarity when I saw it on the page. I wrote, "They are trying to use the future as a leash on the present." And then I wrote, "It is not going to work." I was not going to be pulled back into that relationship by the prospect of an inheritance. Not because the money would not matter practically, it might. Not because I was too proud to care about my own future, but because I had finally learned to calculate the actual cost of going back. The actual cost was this: returning to the dynamic meant returning to the role. The role of the child who caused no trouble and asked for no real recognition. The role of the reliable one who absorbed costs and kept the peace and never made the relationship uncomfortable by needing too much. That role had cost me 32 years of genuine connection with myself. No house was worth that. No estate was worth that. I called my Aunt Rosalind and told her what Derek had said, not for strategic reasons, just because she was one of the few people in my family who actually saw me clearly, and I needed to say it out loud to someone who would understand. She said, "Lousia, please do not go back to them for a house." I said I had no intention of it. She said, "Good." She said, "You are worth more than a transaction, no matter how large the transaction is." I wrote that down too. The following months moved in a particular rhythm. My parents made occasional contact, a text here, a voicemail there. My father's messages were short and slightly formal, like memos. My mother's messages were longer and contained a consistent emotional argument, which was some version of, "We are your parents, and we are getting older, and we don't understand why you are choosing distance over family." I read each message carefully. I did not respond to most of them. When I did respond, it was briefly and warmly, a sentence or two that acknowledged I had heard them without engaging the argument they were making. I was not being cruel. I was not ignoring them out of anger. I had simply decided that the relationship as it existed was not one I could maintain without continuously diminishing myself, and that if my parents ever genuinely wanted a different kind of relationship, one built on actual recognition rather than compliance and usefulness, that door was not permanently closed. But I was not going to stand outside a closed door knocking anymore. I was done with that. My work during this period went well. I had been considered for a promotion to a senior coordinator role, a position that involved managing a team and overseeing a larger portion of our department's administrative function. I applied for it in the spring, and by early summer I had been offered the role. The salary increase was meaningful. The responsibility was something I felt genuinely ready for. My colleagues congratulated me warmly. Theo, who had sat at my birthday dinner and watched the whole thing with quiet horror, took me to lunch to celebrate and said he had known for years I was going to get there. Simone sent me flowers, real ones, with a card that had a long personal message. I put the flowers on my kitchen table where I could see them from the couch, and I looked at them for several days and thought about how different it felt to be celebrated by people who celebrated you freely, without calculation, without a ledger running underneath it. My birthday came again, the 33rd. I planned a dinner again, smaller this time, just Simone and Theo and Derek and Pamela. Pamela was 8 months pregnant by then, round and luminous and laughing easily. We went to a different restaurant, not Caruso's. We had excellent food and good wine and easy conversation, and at no point did anyone reduce my existence to a financial instrument. It was, by a significant margin, the best birthday dinner I had ever had. Derek pulled me aside before we left and said he was sorry, for the 100th time, about the previous year. I said, "Derek, you have nothing to be sorry for. You were also just a kid in that house." He nodded, but I could see he was still carrying it. I said, "The best thing we can do with this is be better to each other than they were to us." He looked at me for a moment, and then he put his arms around me, and we stood there in the parking lot outside the restaurant, and it was the realest family moment I had felt in as long as I could remember. About 4 months after my 33rd birthday, my parents' house had a significant plumbing issue. I know this because my mother called and described it in considerable detail. Something had failed in the main line beneath the house, and the repair estimate was substantial. She said they were in a difficult position. She said the renovation funds they had set aside were gone, spent on the kitchen and the fence, though not the bathroom, which had apparently been deprioritized. She said they were hoping I might be able to help with the plumbing repair cost. I listened to the whole description, and then I said, "Mom, I think you should call your home insurance company first and see what's covered." I said I could help her find the right number if she needed it. I said I was sorry they were dealing with a stressful situation. I said I hoped it got resolved quickly. I did not offer money. She waited on the phone for a moment, as if she expected the next sentence to change, as if I was building to a yes. When I did not give her that yes, she said she supposed she would have to figure it out. I said I believed they would. I said goodnight. She did figure it out. The insurance covered part of it. Derek helped with some of the remainder, which I heard about through Rosalind, not from Derek himself and not from my parents. I felt no guilt about not contributing. I felt something closer to steadiness. The year moved on. I settled into my new role at work. I redid my living room on a budget, painted the walls a color I had been thinking about for a year, bought a second-hand armchair that was exactly right. I started taking a ceramics class on Thursday evenings at a local studio, something I had wanted to do for a long time and kept postponing because I was always spending my time and energy on something else. I was not good at it. I was slightly better than terrible, and getting less terrible each week, and I found that deeply satisfying in a way that was hard to explain. I kept my notebook. I added to it less frantically now, more as a record than a processing tool. I kept the page with the birthday dinner date. I kept the voicemail entry. I kept the conversation with Rosalind. I kept the message about the estate plans. I kept all of it, not as a weapon, not as evidence for any kind of confrontation, just as an honest account of what had happened. My own history writ. 10 by me, in my own words. My parents sent a card at Christmas. It was signed Gerald and Nora in my mother's handwriting. There was nothing personal inside. I looked at it for a moment, and then I put it on the mantel next to the Christmas cards from Rosalind. from Margaret, from Simone and Theo, from Derek and Pamela, from several people who had chosen, without any obligation or calculation, to write my name on an envelope and put a stamp on it and send it through the mail because they wanted me to know I was in their thoughts. I looked at all of those cards together, lined up on my mantle in the apartment I had built into a home by myself, and I felt something that it had taken me 32 years and one terrible birthday dinner to feel. I felt like enough. Not perfect, not finished, not beyond hurt, but enough. Like my own existence was not a question that required someone else's answer. Like who I was did not depend on whether the people who had decided to keep me for financial reasons ever managed to see me as something more than what they had decided I was. I am telling you this story because I think there are people who will hear it and recognize something in it. Not the specific details, because every family's damage has its own shape, but the feeling underneath it. The feeling of being someone who was always reliable and rarely celebrated. The feeling of being someone who kept showing up, kept adjusting, kept hoping that eventually the effort would be enough to earn what should have been given freely. The feeling of finally putting that particular bag down and standing up straighter without it. I am not angry at my parents anymore. That might surprise you. I am not sure they have the capacity to understand what they did, not because they are stupid, but because I think they genuinely believe they fulfilled their obligations. They kept me warm and fed and educated. They managed a financial decision responsibly. In their accounting, that is love, or close enough to it that the difference does not register. I feel something closer to grief for them than anger. Grief for the relationship we never had. Grief for the version of my childhood that existed only in my hopes. Grief for the fact that they never got to experience being parents to a daughter who felt genuinely loved by them, which would have been something worth experiencing, I think. They missed it, and I missed it. And no tax credit, and no estate plan, and no amount of practical management could get any of us back what was never built. But I am here now. I am 33 years old. I have a job I earned and an apartment I made into a home and a ceramics class on Thursday evenings, and a mantle full of Christmas cards from people who write my name because they want to. I have a brother who is learning, alongside me, how to do family differently. I have a niece now, born in October, 8 pounds and already opinionated about sleep schedules and very clear about what she wants. Derek called me from the hospital, and I heard Pamela's exhausted laugh in the background and the small, certain sound of a new person announcing herself. And I cried in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store where I had been buying orange juice when he called. I am going to be a good aunt. I know this the way I know certain things about myself now, clearly and without doubt. I am going to be the person in her life who tells her she is wonderful on days when she does not feel it. I am going to be at her recitals and her difficult days and her ordinary Tuesdays. Not because it is a tax strategy. Not because of what I stand to gain. Just because she exists, and she is wonderful, and she does not need to earn that from me. That is the thing my parents accidentally taught me, in the most backward way imaginable, at a birthday dinner with a tablecloth I had ironed for the first time in my adult life. They taught me what love without conditions actually has to look like, by showing me the opposite so plainly that I finally could not look away from it. I carry that lesson with me everywhere now. I carry it into every relationship, every friendship, every choice I make about where to put my time and my care. I carry it into my Thursday ceramics class when I am doing very badly, and the instructor is patient with me anyway. I carry it into my conversations with Rosalind and Margaret, who call regularly now and treat me like a person they are genuinely glad to know. I carry it into my visits with Derek and Pamela and their small, opinionated daughter. And I carry it into the version of myself that I am still becoming. The version that does not need someone else's calculation to know her own value. The version that stopped knocking on a door that was never built for her and built a new one instead, her own door, her own design, opening into a life she chose with clear eyes and a steadier heart. I am Lousia, and I am exactly enough. Before you go, I want to ask you something that I have been thinking about since the night of that birthday dinner. Is there someone in your life whose love has always felt conditional, like it comes with a quiet invoice attached, like you have been paying a price for something that should have been freely given? And if you are honest with yourself right now, Do you think you have been staying in that dynamic because it is working, or because leaving it means finally admitting that what you hoped for was never really there? Leave your answer in the comments if you feel safe enough to. I read them. And if this story reached something in you today, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes the most important permission we can give another person is the permission to put down a weight they have been carrying for far too long.